Most people grow up learning a simple, reassuring story about money. Long ago, we're told, humans struggled with barter. A farmer had grain but needed shoes. A shoemaker had shoes but wanted meat. Trade was slow, inefficient, and frustrating. Then, somewhere along the way, someone invented money. Coins appeared, trade became smoother, and civilization advanced. It's a neat story, logical, easy to remember, and deeply misleading. Money did not emerge because barter was inconvenient. It emerged because growing systems of power required a tool that could operate beyond memory, beyond relationships, and beyond trust. Once that tool existed, it never stopped shaping who controlled labor, value, and force. Before money, most human societies didn't function on constant barter at all. Within small communities, people rarely negotiated every exchange. Life was organized around obligation, reputation, and shared survival. You gave because you belonged. You received because others knew you would reciprocate. Debts weren't written down, they were remembered. Value wasn't abstract or numerical. It was social, embedded in relationships and history. This arrangement worked remarkably well for thousands of years, as long as societies remained small and personal. But scale changes everything. As populations expanded, villages became cities. Cities became regions. Trade extended beyond family and neighbors. Strangers arrived with no shared past and no reason to trust one another. Memory stopped working as an organizing system. Obligation weakened. Disputes increased. Violence became harder to contain. For rulers, this created a problem barter could never solve. How do you feed an army that doesn't know you? How do you compensate soldiers who may never return home? How do you tax people and spread across vast territories, many of whom you will never meet again? How do you extract value consistently, predictably, and at scale? This is where money enters the story, not as a convenience, but as infrastructure. For value to move across distance and time, it needed a physical form, something durable, portable, divisible, something that could be counted without negotiation and trusted without personal familiarity. Food spoiled, livestock wandered, land couldn't move, labor vanished the moment it was performed. Metal solved these problems. Copper, bronze, and silver weren't chosen for their beauty. They were chosen because they survived pressure. They didn't not rot. They could be melted and reshaped. They could be divided into precise units, and they were scarce enough to matter, yet common enough to circulate. Metal didn't just store value, it made value mobile. But it wasn't merchants who transformed metal into money. It was rulers. Early states in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Eastern Mediterranean didn't need money to trade with one another. They needed money to command. Armies do not fight on goodwill. Soldiers do not march on promises. They require payment, and payment must be standardized, recognizable, and enforceable. Once rulers demanded taxes payable in metal, everything changed. People who had once lived largely outside markets were forced into them. Subsistence farming became obligation. The harvests became liabilities. To obtain metal, peasants had to sell goods, labor, or time. Markets did not emerge spontaneously. They were pulled into existence by taxation and authority. Money did not free people from rulers. It made rulers vastly more efficient. This is the part of monetary history rarely emphasized. Money was never neutral. It was not invented to make trade fairer or easier between equals. It was designed to measure, extract, and redeploy value at scale. Once value could be extracted, it could be stored. Once it could be stored, it could be accumulated. And once it could be accumulated, it could be converted into force. That is why early financial centers were not marketplaces. They were temples and palaces. Priests and kings tracked grain, metal, and labor long before merchants traded freely. Accounting came before coinage. Ledgers came before markets. The system was built from the top down, not the bottom up. Then came the next transformation. Metal alone was useful. Stamped metal was revolutionary. When states began minting coins, marking pieces of metal with official symbols, weights, and authority, they were not merely standardizing trade, they were standardizing trust. A coin carried a message. You do not need to trust the person handing this to you. You only need to trust the authority behind it. Relationship was replaced by abstraction. In Lydia, in Greek city-states, and later in Rome, coins carried faces, gods, and emblems of power. They were not just economic tools, they were political statements. Every transaction reinforced who ruled. Every payment reminded people which system they lived inside, and once rulers realized this, temptation followed. Control over money meant control over supply, purity, and circulation. The governments learned they could stretch resources by reducing metal content, clipping edges, or issuing more coins than reserves justified. Spending became easier. Consequences were delayed. Inflation was not discovered in modern times. It was born the moment money became adjustable. Prices rose, trust weakened, soldiers demanded higher pay, markets adapted, and yet the system endured, because once money existed, societies could not go back. The tool was too powerful, too embedded, too useful to abandon. Money did not evolve away from power. It evolved alongside it. The bronze coins of ancient empires may be gone, but the logic they introduced never disappeared. We still rely on standardized units. We still accept authority-defined value. We still substitute abstraction for trust. The materials have changed. The incentives have not. Once value could be stored, power no longer required constant coercion. It could be accumulated quietly. Armies could be prepared before wars began. Bureaucracies could expand even in peacetime. Control could be smoothed over time, rather than extracted violently all at once. Money made authority patient, and patience is one of the most effective forms of power. This is why monetary systems tend to outlast rulers. Kings fall, dynasties collapse. The borders shift, yet money absorbs new symbols, new faces, new institutions, while preserving the same underlying structure. Coins once carried gods, then emperors, then national emblems. Today they carry institutional guarantees. The imagery evolves, the message remains the same. As economies expanded, money spread far beyond its original purpose. What began as a way to pay soldiers and collect taxes became the backbone of trade, credit, hierarchy, and inheritance. Wealth could now move across generations. Debt could be recorded, transferred, and enforced. Inequality could persist long after its original causes faded from memory. This is the moment money stopped being a tool and became an environment. By the height of empires like Rome, money was everywhere. Markets thrived, trade networks stretched across continents. Coins passed through countless hands, carrying no memory of who mined the metal, who was taxed to extract it, or who suffered when its value was manipulated. Abstraction did its job. The system felt natural, invisible, inevitable. When pressure mounted, rulers rarely questioned the system itself. Wars were expensive. Administrations demanded payment. Raising taxes risked rebellion, so value was diluted quietly. A little less silver, a little more currency. The effects arrived slowly. Inflation crept in. Trust eroded. By the time consequences became obvious, decision-makers were often long gone. Solving present problems by borrowing from the future has a long history. Modern money no longer clinks in pockets, but it still carries the same DNA. Today's currencies are not backed by metal, but by authority, obligation, and enforcement. Taxes are still due. Debts are still enforced. Armies are still funded. Scarcity is still managed, not by nature, but by policy. The language is more refined. Instead of debasement, we say liquidity. Instead of clipped coins, we say balance sheets. Instead of emperors, we say institutions. This does not make modern finance evil. It makes it human. The mistake is assuming money evolved to be fair. It did not. It evolved to be scalable. Fairness has always been negotiated afterward through politics, resistance, and reform. The core design of money has consistently favored those who control issuance, rules, and enforcement. That is not conspiracy. That is history. Understanding this changes how you view inflation, debt, and financial crises. These are not glitches in an otherwise perfect system. They are features of a structure built to manage large populations, large obligations, and large power imbalances. Under stress, the system bends, sometimes quietly, sometimes violently, but never randomly. Modern money no longer clinks in pockets, but it still carries the same DNA. Today's currencies are not backed by metal, but by authority, obligation, and enforcement. Taxes are still due, debts are still enforced, armies are still funded. Scarcity is still managed, not by nature, but by policy. The language is more refined. Instead of debasement, we say liquidity. Instead of clipped coins, we say balance sheets. Instead of emperors, We say institutions. This does not make modern finance evil, it makes it human. The mistake is assuming money evolved to be fair. It did not. It evolved to be scalable. Fairness has always been negotiated afterward, through politics, resistance, and reform. The core design of money has consistently favored those who control issuance, rules, and enforcement. That is not conspiracy. That is history. Understanding this changes how you view inflation, debt, and financial crises. These are not glitches in an otherwise perfect system. They are features of a structure built to manage large populations, large obligations, and large power imbalances. Under stress, the system bends, sometimes quietly, sometimes violently, but never randomly.